A nice bounce back on local markets, but as I was saying earlier, key word at this stage is sustainability. Yes, we've seen some positive data. Yes, we've seen some resolution in Greece, but we've also got long-standing and long-term factors that are negative lingering in the background.
Yes, absolutely. And you just mentioned the situation in Greece. Just look at the trouble there's been to get this advance of $12 million euros, sorry, to keep them solvent just for a short while. A matter of weeks it's only going to be. Then they have to negotiate another tranche. This will be the 6th tranche of this rescue package of $30 million. Now, if they've had this much trouble with this particular tranche, there's going to be a whole lot more and a whole lot more opportunity for social unrest, for social objections. I think that this Greece sovereign debt problem is going to be a thorn in the side. No, it's going to be a major problem in the side of financial markets globally probably for the second half of this year.
Of course, it's also in a context where it's not only that quarter of the world that's looking at this debt problem. Let's bring it across the Atlantic, looking at the US. A lot of debate at this stage on raising that debt ceiling right now.
Yes, absolutely. One hopes that sense will prevail in the American political setup, but one should never rely on that, really. I think that it's surely that they have to come to an agreement between the two major political parties simply to keep the administration solvent. I can't believe that they won't do that, but the trouble is, in the mayhem of political point scoring, I think that the US Federal Reserve loses credibility because it's seen what they have to cope with from a political point of view. I think that the dollar itself is also going to lose credibility and may just carry on over time in a gently subsiding manner.
Of course, at this stage, Ian, we've got a lot of focus on economic data that's filtering through. That's fast going to change as we see corporate earnings hitting the market scene as well, and focus shifting that way. And in that regard, many traders at the desk have said that the bar has been raised too high. We're going to be falling short of those expectations, and the market's set for a hard landing. Your view on that?
Well, certainly I think that the expectations have been too high. We just have to look at initially the recovery certainly started in the US, and then it spread from there in the second half, particularly the last quarter of 2010, carried through to the first quarter of this year. But now that inventories have been rebuilt, there's nowhere near the same impetus that there was to keep the whole rate of recovery going. And I think that we're already seeing that the recovery, the data coming into the second quarter is slower, still growing, but at a slower rate, and I think that's important. And I think that if the outlook for corporate profitability then going on from there must also be to slower improvements, and that's going to apply to South Africa as well, I think.
Still growing and at a slower rate. That rings a bell, specifically when you're looking at some of the local economic data that's filtered through this afternoon. Vehicle sales figures are coming through. Your reading of that?
Well, yes, it's encouraging, up by 12.5% year on year for total sales. What we have to look at is, compared to the previous month, it was only 6%. So yes, that is better. But if you look at the total number of vehicles sold, we've only reached the sort of level that we were at about 4 or 5 years ago. So there's a long way to go to get a particularly buoyancy in the motor manufacturing sector. They have been helped quite considerably by exports, and that is doing pretty well. But if we have to look at a breakdown of the vehicles themselves, 17% in passenger vehicles, and a nominal percentage, under 1%, in commercial, light commercial and taxi vehicles. That just goes to say that while the individual's personal balance sheets may be improving, small to medium-sized businesses are not picking up that quickly. They're not seeing the opportunity for expansion. That's why it isn't broad-based. However, right at the top end of the scale, one can't help but notice that those with plenty to spend are still spending it. There were 121 Porsches sold this month. That's a heck of a number, and it shows how there's a concentration of wealth amongst a small number of people who are spending it.
Exactly, and it's exactly that seems to be, adding fuel to the fire when it comes to wage negotiations this time around. We're in the middle of that season right now, and NUM currently, in wage negotiations, and we're seeing strikes underway. What are you making of that scenario? Just how much cognizance is the market taking of this, knowing that this is a seasonal factor that the markets take into consideration?
Right. Well, this is the wage negotiating season. We get it every year at about this time, and every year they say, oh, we've got agreements going forward 2 or 3 years, but comes the middle of the following year and they seem to have to start all over again. So I think where the problem is that we're seeing still those awards that have already been made well above the inflation rate. It's going to feed into higher producer inflation with no agreement on improved productivity. So it's going to make us less competitive in world markets, and it's a heck of a hurdle for us to overcome. It's going to be very difficult, together with a strong rand, to push our exports past these sort of barriers.
Of course, we've got NUMSA demanding wage increases of 13% from the metal and engineering industries, down from that initial demand of 20%. Let's drill down into some companies, Ian, that have been standing in the spotlight today. Datatech, one of them, with Logicalis having acquired a Detroit IT service business, NetArcs. How have you read into that news?
Well, yes. Look, it's an area of expertise that they're acquiring, but one has to look at the value of that. $35 million, maybe about 25 million rands. You know, it's less than 5% of their total market capital. So it's a small contribution to the business as a whole, but it's good to see them consolidating in that area of expertise and in that area of world markets, just to show they do have a good geographical spread of business. It's a positive move, but only a relatively small one, but in the right direction.
Your approach towards the IT players right now, because we know that, you know, in the recession, you've got businesses and consumers really prolonging the upgrading of IT infrastructure and software for as long as they can, but that can only be done for so long.
Absolutely, and they dare not fall behind. With a service provider in the way of Datatech, the type of business they are, they have to do their best to stay in the forefront of developments, which is why I think that this Logicalis development is a very positive one for their business right away and also over time.
Well, we've got Telecom trading ex-dividend today, and explaining to a large extent the big fallback we've seen in that price. But it's also at a time where there's lots of debate on what Telecom's strategy is, whether it's on the right path now, and we're going to see the re-engineering of a successful company moving forward.
Yes, one has to ask regarding Telecom, is there a strategy? If it is, they found it difficult to define it, and it's even more difficult for shareholders to appreciate it and to understand it, because we haven't seen positive steps forward, and I think without one doesn't want to be too directly rude to them. There may be plans in the wing, but they've not been evident, and the difficulties they've had in Nigeria, what it's cost them, huge amounts, a $300 million investment from which they rescued $10 million. Gee, I think, as I said, recognizing their strategy is particularly difficult right now.
Especially
so I would tend, as a potential shareholder, to stay away from it.
Especially where you've got players like Vodacom and MTN seeming to be spelling out their strategies pretty clearly at this stage. Having said that, we've got these companies running into some headwinds. It seems Vodacom, cutting off 1 million users on Friday for failing to register their SIM cards under the new law that's been implemented in the country, that being RICA. What kind of impact do you see this having on the likes of Vodacom and MTN?
It's difficult to say. I can tell you that my wife was one of those people inadvertently cut off, and really, that I think there were a list of people who had a similar problem. They said something like 1 million people, and that is terribly difficult for them to cope with. It impacts on their reputation, and I think that it's going to have an effect on shareholders' view on the outlook for the companies as a whole.
We've got both of those players trading in positive territory right now. We've got a debate as to whether they're growth stocks, whether they're value stocks at this stage. Your view, Ian, and would you be choosing one over the other?
No, I don't think so. I like MTN because of their greater geographic spread, but very difficult to say. I think that they are both really go-ahead businesses that see into the future and probably going to maintain that. They've got such a firm stronghold in South Africa, but South Africa is a relatively saturated market, I think that looking at Africa as a whole, as their future geographic spread, I would say that either of them would be good ways to go.
Let's take a look at some of the retailers. Steinhoff signing a 1.26 billion euro loan refinancing agreement, and that to refinance that 780 million euro bridge loan that was used for the acquisition of a French retailer Conforama. market reading of that news?
Well, I think that, it was only a temporary facility they had. I think it was for 1 year. Now they are confirming that it's going to be an ongoing facility, shows their determination to strengthen their foothold in the manufacturing side as well as the retail side in Europe. And I think that's going to give one a geographic spread of business. I think it makes it particularly attractive in that particular sector from our shareholders, from shareholders based in South Africa. A very positive move, I would say, in strengthening their total base.
And the same seems to be holding true for Massmart. We've heard news over the weekend emerge yet again about its strategy and how it's planning to, bring in market share from some of its other South African competitors with the Walmart tie-up, and now going on to online retailing.
Yes, well, I think that's good. It just shows their determination to cover the market, to cover all fields of retailing, and it's a warning shot across the bows of other retailers. Pick and Pay were quite strong, I believe, in this e-retail, as they call it, and I think that I think the Walmart have done their homework. They're going to attack on all fronts, and they're going to do that by expanding their floor space, by expanding every way they can to get to the South African consumer. I would say it's a very good omen for the consumer as a whole, who is certainly going to find prices remaining competitive or perhaps even dropping. I think from that point of view, that's quite positive for spending as a whole.
Well, very quickly, before we let you go, in a quick word on these gold miners. Goldfields up 1.5%. We've got Anglo Gold trading 0.75% higher, and Harmony up 0.5% as well. This on the back of the fact that gold price is still holding below $1,500 an ounce, and the rand is looking relatively strong.
I think that part of it was a recovery from the knock they took back on Friday. It's quite surprising with the gold still, as you said, below $1,500, with the rand looking particularly strong. There's nothing positive, but nothing to see going for it right now, except it may just be, this is international investors, fear index. They're still concerned about the Greece situation. They're still concerned about the huge monetary expansion in monetary policy that there has been in the US, and therefore they're buying pure gold stocks as a hedge against inflation, as against unstable paper-backed currencies. I think that just says that investors as a whole are saying they have to have those hedges, and I think that's why these companies, apart from being a bounce from last week's losses, are getting some attention right now.